Hello. Today I'm going to talk about spiritual communication. It's an interest I have. It's something I've been, I don't want to say exploring, but aware of in some ways my entire life, but in a more directed way, I would say in the last 25 years. I'm going to start with this quote by Anais Nin. We do not see things as they are, we see them as we are. So with that in mind, the other night I was rewatching a movie I actually like quite a bit. I used to have it on Laserdisc back in the day. I hadn't seen it in years, but I'm doing a top 10 Gnostic films part 2 video. You can see part 1 there if you're interested. And one of the films that I'm adding to this list is, spoilers, is The Last Temptation of Christ by Martin Scorsese. And in that film, you know, when I saw it back in the day, this would have been, I haven't seen it in over 20 years probably. I saw it as sort of a scandalous religious film where it was taking religious ideas and humanizing them and making them kind of raw and visceral, which I appreciated at the time. I thought it was a great film. And I thought all the performances and everything were great. I'll talk more about it in that other video. But one thing I noticed in the rewatch is that Jesus's struggle with hearing God is almost a painful or obtrusive experience for him. A lot of times when he's having these, hearing these voices, let's say, you hear this eagle screech sound effect in the background as if, you know, a bird is coming down and like tearing into his head. And that kind of caught me in a strange way because I started, you know, the last few years I've been reassessing symbols and communication, which I'll explain more in a second. In the movie, there's one quote he says, "I don't hear him." At face value, it seems that he's talking about God, right? But as I watched the film and I looked at it from a Gnostic point of view, I think it actually means a lot more. I'll explain it more in the other video, but for this one, I think it means that there is some ambiguity on who him is. And in our own lives, our communication with what we think of as the divine might not be what we think it is. And that's basically what I'm going to cover in this video. Dreams are the mirror of the soul. This is a quote by Mircea Eliade. He's an anthropologist and a man well versed in shamanic initiations and things. And you could say that if our intellect is like the higher God, then dreams are almost like the Demiurge because they're a reflection of the higher truths. And I would actually say dreams are quite flawed because obviously there's dream logic and they don't really, they're kind of messy. I would not call them ordered by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm going to talk briefly about a few dreams I had and what I think of them then and what I think of them now. So when I was a child, I had this daemon dream. Daemon is the sort of guardian spirit in ancient Greek thought, sort of a higher version of you that's watching out for you and kind of guiding you. And when I was a child, this dream would scare me a lot, this sort of being coming. And for many, many years, I thought it was just a nightmare that stuck with me. Eventually, when I wrote my first book, I realized that it was more than that. At that time, I thought of it as a more ancient Greek point of view, that this higher being, higher part of myself was coming to tell me something. Now, with more hindsight and a Gnostic point of view, I almost think that I'm not sure. And that's what I'm going to get to with a lot of these ideas, is that are we being communicated to by God, or are we being communicated to by the Demiurge? I had a different dream when I was a kid, and I'll explain this one a little deeper. There was some kind of calamity or destruction, and the city was destroyed. And I was in some kind of collapsed building, and there was a woman in the building, and I was trying to save the woman and get out of the collapsed building. In my early 20s, that dream stuck with me my whole life, and in my early 20s, I sort of thought that might be a kind of psychological, deep down need to be a hero, blah, 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 male saves female kind of trope. But now when I look back on it, I think it's quite prophetic, especially since I come from a ruined city, Detroit. I didn't really put that together earlier in my life, but I kind of think that the woman is actually Sophia, and the ruins are this material world I exist in. And I'm not trying to save her, she's trying to save me. I never really put that together when I was a child, but now I realize that by me trying to save her, I'm saving myself, if that makes sense. Synchronicity is the meaning that is behind things and events. It is the connecting principle between what happens in the world and what happens in the psyche, from Carl Jung. So I've had thousands and thousands of synchronicities in my life. I wouldn't say they happen daily, but they happen often enough that it's a common thing. And my most recent is interesting because I was living in Korea and I had 2 teaching jobs there on top of my writing and on top of my YouTube channel. So I was quite busy, and I couldn't really devote as much attention to the YouTube channel as I wanted to. And so when I moved to Mexico, one of my promises to myself was that I would devote more time to the YouTube channel. And I've done that. But when I walked into a building that I was going to try to rent a room in, an apartment, I walked in and I was going up the stairs, and on the wall there's like one stairwell and then another stairwell, and on the wall in the platform someone had painted Sterling Quest. And it was interesting to me. I found out after that it's the name of the building, but it doesn't really say that, on a big sign or anything. So I wasn't really sure why that was painted on the wall. But the first thing that popped into my mind is that, sterling could be seen as like silver or like a higher reward or treasure. And then obviously a quest is a quest. And so I realized that because I was kind of sacrificing some of my income to come here, and I'm applying it to the YouTube channel and other things, more writing that I do, freelance stuff, things like that, it is kind of a quest to get a different kind of balance in my life. So it was very, very potent synchronicity. Years ago, when I would have these synchronicities, I thought it was God guiding me. Now I'm not so sure. Anytime you move to a new place, there are challenges, especially in the first few months. I'd say the first 6 months are usually quite difficult. So I've had, many challenges here so far. And, that synchronicity on the wall, if you look at it as if it's God speaking to me, then it's like, I'm on the right track, right? But if you look at it as the archons or the demiurge, then it's almost like, yeah, go ahead and try that. See where you get, or like see how you will suffer to get that. And yeah, it just shows that you can look at it two ways depending on your point of view. So I don't know if you've had synchronicities and they've changed their meaning over time, comment below and tell me about them because I'm curious. It could just be like archonic, like, like a challenge, or like, ha ha ha, you're trying this, but it's not actually working, even though you think it's working. You think you're on the right path, but we're going to show you kind of vibe. The symbol, in its truest sense, is not the representation of an abstract thought, but a living power, and that's by Joseph Campbell. Through my whole life, even way before I got into Gnosticism or even magic, I was a fan of symbols because I made art, and art is often based off of symbols. I've had fascinations with the tarot, which is a load of symbols. Going back to early high school, I was into the tarot cards and like dream symbolism books, all this stuff. One of the ways that symbolism kind of gets presented is through animals. You could say you have like a spirit animal or an animal totem, that kind of thing. I've had a few different experiences in my life that have involved animals and viewing them as symbols. There was a time where I was in love with someone and I had to take the bus to her house, and I had to walk really far to get to her house. And I would do it, it wasn't every day, but it was often. A couple times, maybe 3 or 4 times a week, I'd go to her house. And it was quite a trek from where I lived. It was, I wouldn't say it's a struggle, but it was definitely work to get to her house. So I'd walk this same stretch every time, and I would see these 2 crows kind of, flying around. I started thinking of the crow as almost a spirit guide or something, or a totem, animal totem. And on several other occasions through my life, I've seen a black crow, usually at very pivotal moments. I've also had several dreams with cats trying to lead me somewhere, and I'll throw a few cat interpretations on the screen here as well. But with that said, I'm going to get back to dreams for a second. I had a really strange dream several years ago when I was co-writing a book with a friend of mine. I'll put the link in the description of the book. But it was about another friend of ours who was a mystic, and I had this dream about him while we were writing the book, and it was about my time when I knew him. So I'm going to read an excerpt from the book real quick. A dream came. I sat in a lawn chair next to a small bonfire in the backyard of my parents' suburban house. It was the late 1980s before I met him. Regardless, there he stood, almost 30 years old and motionless, staring straight ahead like a military man. An army of fire ants appeared near the bonfire pit. He stared into space. Ants marched into the coals, single file. He remained silent as the fire didn't harm the ants. Breaking the silence, he said something about being a space cadet. The words haunted me. Something about the word cadet seemed serious despite the spacey connotations. Ants continued crawling around the fire unharmed. He turned with his lopsided grin and said, "Gotta save the little guys." Okay, as you can see, that's a pretty strange dream. And I think there are many layers of meaning in that dream. And I would even say that some of the things that that friend taught me, I have obviously applied to my life, but they have made me make this YouTube channel, actually. Even though I don't think he would actually like this, I think he would be opposed to it. But I have a desire to awaken as many people as possible. So, I don't know, that's where we differ in opinion. In this case, the fire ant is a very potent symbol, as well as the fire. And I'm going to get into spiritual fire more in another video later. But you could say spiritual fire is like the divine spark. And I would say the fire ants are kind of like people, you know, walking into the fire. But we remain unharmed, and we get through the fire if we are resolute. So there are other ways to have spiritual communication. I'm not going to get too deeply into these, but I'm just going to mention them. One is talking boards. I've used talking boards over the years, and I definitely think they work. However, I'm going to give a little warning here. I don't think they're for everyone. If you have any kind of psychological illness or things like that, I mean, I think everybody does to a degree, but if you have serious problems, I would stay away from them, because I think they are a kind of labyrinth you could easily get lost in. Similar to what I've been hearing a lot about AI, you know, there are people that treat AI as a companion, and I think that's a mistake. I think it's a tool, just like the talking board. And if you start using AI as a companion, it can lead you astray. I know there was a man who committed suicide. Can't remember what country it was in. I think it might have been Sweden or Norway or someplace. And yeah, I mean, I definitely think there is that danger, because all of these kind of oracle devices, they speak in riddles. And unless you can approach them from a certain point of view, I think they're kind of dangerous. Spirits, auditory hallucinations, and you could say trips have this element as well, psychedelic trips. So some people hear voices without an external source, and you could say that that's schizophrenia. I think schizophrenia exists, but I don't think just because you hear a voice that that is schizophrenia. I think your subconscious and the collective unconscious is very powerful, and sometimes these things kind of leak through and you hear things. For Jung, hearing them is a form of psychic material seeking expression. I think that's the better way to look at it. And in terms of a schizophrenic, maybe it's so much psychic material that it overwhelms the person or the psyche, and they can't deal with it. If you have mental health, let's say, then maybe you can sort it out. Now, if you keep hearing things and it gets more and more, then you have to kind of think about where these voices are coming from and whether they're real or not. And when I say real, I don't necessarily mean that other people can hear them. I mean that they have a psychological component. I think the best way to think of it is, you know, the unconscious is just a big ocean. And, you know, sometimes things come up from the ocean. We're still discovering things coming up from our oceans. So, like, you can imagine the unconscious and subconscious being so deep that there are things from eons ago that might come up. So some of these things that he talks about are these kind of symbolic archetypes. There's the wise old man. You could see Merlin or Gandalf or Dumbledore or Yoda as this archetype. You can also see the hermit card in the tarot this way. It means that you're trying to break through to some kind of wisdom or some kind of higher truth. Then there's the shadow aspect. The person rejects or denies or remains unaware because it's incompatible with their conscious self-image. We all have that, and it all breaks through. You see it a lot when people are drinking alcohol. And actually, I would say the dream I mentioned earlier about the ruined city connects to this. I think a lot of that is my shadow. I'll be candid here, I love women, and I've had some great relationships with women, but I've also had some disastrous relationships with women. And I think because of my background, to some degree, I'm trying to save women often. I don't think it's good for me, but it's some kind of repressed shadow aspect. I've gotten better in the last probably 10 years, maybe, trying to, but that's just, I think, something everybody knows is a daily struggle when you have these shadow aspects of your personality. There's the anima, animus. The inner feminine side of a man is the anima, and the inner masculine side of a woman is the animus. The anima can be represented by figures like Helen of Troy, or the Virgin Mary, or Sophia in the Gnostic tradition. The animus can be represented by figures like Zeus, Hermes, any kind of cultural hero, fathers, kings, or warriors. I would say for myself, a lot of my work, especially my first novel, deals heavily with this. With both archetypes, actually. And at the time when I was writing it, I was just following my intuition. But now looking back, I realize that that novel was almost a psychological assessment of myself. Almost a kind of healing, or you could say it was a kind of individuation. Now that I am past it many years, I look back on it and I think it's a bit of a mess as a writer, but as a creator, I think it's kind of beautiful in its innocent revealing of the shadow side of myself and the kind of darkness that I have inside of me, but also the light. And yeah, I just think that if you haven't written a book, you should do it because you will learn a lot about yourself in the process. Or just a journal, anything. I think you will learn a lot about yourself in the process. Myths are the dreams of humanity. They are the most profound expressions of the human spirit. I'm very fascinated with myths, and I do think that they're very symbolic, and they've definitely wormed their way into my writing and artwork over the years. And I like to kind of take an existing myth and kind of recontextualize it and, update it, let's say. And I think there are a lot to them. People often just see myths as moral lesson kind of stories, but I don't see them that way. I see them as waking dreams kind of, or something. Eternal ideas that were discovered somehow, probably through a lot of self-work by the people that created them. So with all that said, here are my questions. Are you listening? Are you listening for these symbols? Are you listening for these voices, these animal spirits, synchronicities? Are you paying attention to your dreams? And I don't mean just paying attention, I mean dissecting them and trying to figure out what they actually mean, because there are deep layers and all of that stuff. And if you are listening to these things, who's sending the messages? If you have a theory about that, you can comment below. I personally am torn now. I don't know if it's God or Demiurge or both. If you think of good and evil as a struggle, maybe there are two opposing sides sending me messages, and I have to be the one to figure out who's who, or how I pay attention or sublimate those messages, how I use them. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Take care. Have a good day.